I'm going to ask Dean Hasan Pirkul, our Dean, to welcome you. Dean Pirkul, as I've noted, is the Dean of the School of Management. He concurrently holds the Caruth Chair of Management. And prior to coming to UT Dallas, he was at the Max Fisher College of Business at Ohio State University, where he was a very rabid Buckeye fan, among other things. He's a graduate of the University of Rochester. He receives the MS degree in Management Science in '80, the PhD degree in Computer Information Systems in '83, and that's after earning a bachelor's degree in Industrial Engineering from Boğaziçi University in Turkey. His research interests include design of telecommunication networks, distributed computer system design, and knowledge-based systems. Additionally, Dr. Pirkul was recognized as one of the outstanding technologists of the year by the Texas Technology magazine. He is the founding editor-in-chief of the Journal of Information Technology and Management. He has also served as associate editor of leading academic journals. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our Dean, Hasan Pirkul.
Connie is very kind. Thank you, Connie, for that great introduction. You know, a lot of these things are just these recognitions and awards and those kinds of things are just being there. I kind of believe that if you are there long enough, people kind of figure, well, we got to give this guy something, and God knows I have been here long enough. This is my 14th year as the dean of the school, so it's been a great 14 years. We enjoyed it. The school has changed tremendously in that time, and along the way, a few people have recognized me, and that pleases me. You know, my main job today is to introduce our speaker, David Walker. This man is my hero. We need more people like him. You know, he is in Washington particularly, we need more people like him. He speaks to the future of this country. He speaks for the future generations of this country. We have done a tremendous disservice. My generation, particularly, our generation particularly, has done tremendous disservice to the future generations. And the more people speak about the debt that we have accumulated for our sons and our grandchildren, granddaughters to pay, the better it is. This is not political. This cuts across party lines. I think it has to do though with Washington versus everybody else. And so we really appreciate what he does. Let me do the formal introduction. He's the president and CEO of Peter Peterson Foundation. Before this, he served as a decade, both under Clinton as well as Bush administrations, as the Comptroller General of the United States, head of the Government Accountability Office. A decade is a long time. He knows ins and outs. And in fact, before that, he was trustee for Social Security and Medicare. So, you know, that's a totally related, but a whole new chapter on this. I'm sure he will be able to talk to us about. It's indeed. For us, it's indeed a great honor to have him here today. He was, this is, I kind of, as I was doing this, I kind of thought about my experience at Ohio State. I was at Ohio State for 15 years. I'm not an accountant myself, but I was in the accounting and MIS department at Ohio State. And so we had all these accounting jokes. The MIS side of the house would be joking with our accounting colleagues. And I'm thinking, wow, this is kind of the revenge of the accountants. This is for me to stand up here and acknowledge the great contributions that he's made is sort of the revenge of the accountants. And by the way, our president who spoke to you this morning he's originally from Texas, but he was a professor dean at University of Illinois. And so I had an occasion to meet him earlier this week. I asked him whether he watched the football games on Saturday. He says, yeah, I was really busy, and but his wife did confess that he did watch the Ohio State Illinois game. So I cannot help bring that up. That was a nice, good game. He was before his service at government. He was with Arthur Andersen, and he was a partner and global director with Arthur Andersen. Before that, he went to school at Jacksonville University, has a BS in accounting, has a certificate from Harvard in government management field, and with further ado.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dean. It's good to be back at UT Dallas and to be back in Texas. I flew in this morning from Alabama, and it may not be popular, but I'm an Alabama fan. And this is a kind of a flashback. You know, I remember back when I was young, and I saw programs when Joe Namath was quarterback at Alabama. And I lived in Miami when Alabama and Texas played in the great game with Tommy Nobis stopped Joe Namath on the 1-foot line for the national championship. So it's about time that Texas and Alabama came back. Ohio State's got a great team, obviously, as well. What you may not know, Dean, and you probably do since you were there, is Ohio State also has the Accounting Hall of Fame. Yes, and rumor is I'm going to be nominated for that, or something, That doesn't mean I'm getting in. That and several bucks will get me a cup of coffee. I know that. I've been asked to talk to you about the federal financial condition, but, I really want to talk to you about a few issues before I get there. And I've been sitting listening to the sessions this morning, getting my CPE credits, and learning some great jokes. And I wish that, I had a lot of jokes for my material, but, unfortunately, my material is not a laughing matter. And it's also the truth. But let me start with a rather provocative statement. Just what country are we in nowadays? When is the last time that people read the Constitution of the United States? And let me just mention 3 examples. The prior speaker, Bob, talked about being taken off of a plane by 2 Treasury agents and detained for 2 days at the Treasury Department. This is not Russia. This is the United States of America. That's an outrage. Secondly, the government now owns Government Motors Corporation. We've got no business owning major corporations. Shockingly, I live on land that George Washington used to own, and I'm a member of the Sons of the American Revolution, in fact, president of the George Washington chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution, a national officer. Washington cautioned us about engaging in foreign conflicts. We haven't declared war since World War II, and yet we've invaded countries without declaring war. And I don't care what you think about their leaders or whatever, you don't invade sovereign nations without declaring war. This country is out of touch and out of control. I mean, Washington. Washington is out of touch and totally out of control. And I think that there is a movement brewing for a major, major shakeup. Peaceful, but a major shakeup. And this is not a partisan issue, and this is not a personal issue. This has been coming for a while, but we see it, I feel it. This conference is about bubbles, bust, and bailouts. We all know about the tech and housing bubble burst. We all know about Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers. Arthur Andersen, frankly, was a bust. I'll mention a few words about that. That happened after I left. The wheels of the bus came off after I left. So we know about AIG, the various financial institutions, GM, Chrysler, etc. But let me mention myself about Arthur Andersen, because there's some lessons to be learned here. Arthur Andersen was the only one of the major so-called Big Eight firms when I came out of college, graduated in 1973, that started in the United States. It was the only one that was basically homegrown. It never did a major merger with one of the other firms. It was the only firm that was truly a global firm that had global revenue sharing. It was the firm that was about stewardship, leadership, focusing on the future, client service. Money, the money will come if you do the right thing. That's the firm that I joined in 1989. Frankly, it lost its way. It was about stewardship, which I'll come back to. And when I left in 1998 to become Comptroller General of the United States, there were too many people that were focused on, well, how much are we making versus Andersen Consulting? How much is the U.S. making versus Europe? How much are we making compared to chief financial officers? How can we grow revenues and partner earnings faster? And I said, whoa, wait a minute. You've lost your way. And we all know what happened. A few people didn't do their job. Leadership and management didn't take it seriously enough. And the government overreacted and indicted the firm rather than responsible individuals. And even though the Supreme Court later said the government overreached, the government didn't understand the market. The market had killed the firm by that point in time. In part because Andersen was in the trust business. And when you breach a trust, what it took 80 to 90 years to build can go from the global gold standard to gone in less than 2 years. And that's Arthur Andersen. And that can happen to others. For any system to work, whether it's a corporate governance system, whether it's a healthcare system, a tax system, or an executive compensation system, you have to have three critical elements. Harvard taught me the rule of threes. Number one, you have to have properly aligned and integrated incentives to encourage people to do the right thing. Number two, you have to have appropriate transparency to provide reasonable assurance that people will do the right thing. And number three, you need to have adequate accountability if people do the wrong thing. And just as in the case of criminal prosecutions, you don't need to give but one or two people a wide striped suit to send a signal that will be powerful. We need to focus on these three key elements: incentives, transparency, and accountability in addressing a lot of our public and private sector challenges. But one of the concerns that I have in this country right now is the cultural shift that has occurred. And let me mention a few, and how dramatically things have changed from when this country was founded in 1789, where we had way more than our fair share of visionaries and global leaders, to where we are today. Some of these are based upon the Constitution, and others are based on other principles and values. We started as a country of opportunity. Too many people today think they are entitled to things merely because they are physically in this country. We started as a country of personal responsibility. And now many believe there is a public obligation that it grows and grows to a greater extent. We started as a country of thrift, and we became a country of conspicuous consumption. We believed in the importance and the prudence of saving, because saving represented a seed corn for the future. And starting in the 1980s or so, and that's not a political statement, it's based on numbers, we became addicted to debt, both as a nation and too many citizens. We started as a country that if you didn't pay your bills, you went to prison. We had debtor's prison. And today, bankruptcy is both a corporate and a personal exit strategy. And while I don't think the United States will ever declare bankruptcy, we're sure headed that way if we don't make some tough choices. We started as a country that believed that believed in stewardship, not just leaving the country better off, but better positioned for the future. And we've become a country of short-termism, if that's a word. We started where individuals were concerned with duty and honor, to where, frankly, there's little shame. Joe Biden, the vice president, says he's going to shame people that don't spend the stimulus money right. I don't know that that's possible anymore. We haven't heard much from Joe lately. We started where we had more than our fair share of leaders, and I would respectfully say that at least in Washington today, we have way more than our fair share of laggards. On my lapel, I have two things: a rosette of the Sons of the American Revolution and a CPA pen, which means I'm a patriot who can add. And we need a lot more of them in Washington. You know, the United States is not top 25 in the world in math. I don't think we're top 100 in Washington. We suffer from three maladies, and not just in Washington, in broad segments of society: myopia, or short-sightedness; tunnel vision, looking at one issue at a time, looking at the narrow perspective without understanding the bigger picture, the collateral effect, the domino effect of doing one thing here, how it'll affect another; and self-centeredness. Now, there are exceptions to this rule, but what's the combination of myopia and tunnel vision? That's what it is. We, even from a budget standpoint, when we talk about the long term, we use flat earth theory, 10 years. I thought Columbus proved the earth was round. I personally think the United States is going to be here longer than 10 years. And guess what? When you end up looking at how Washington keeps score on things, it's amazing how things just kind of tend to get a little bit worse, or a lot worse, after the horizon, because of demographics, because of a variety of other factors. You know, there are several types of risk. There's financial risk, there's physical risk, there's information security risk, there's reputational risk, among other things. And all of these are relevant for government, the private sector, and frankly, many of us as individuals. All of us are aware of the mortgage-related subprime crisis, the bubble that burst. But what you may not be aware is that there are four common denominators between the conditions and the factors that caused the mortgage-related subprime crisis and the deteriorating financial condition of our federal government. And let me share with you what those four are. Obviously, these are my opinion. First, a disconnect between the people who benefited from the prevailing policies and practices and those who paid the price and bore the burden when the bubble burst. In the case of mortgage-related subprime, the people that made all the origination fees weren't the people who held the mortgages when things went bad. In U.S. government terms, today's taxpayers benefit from low tax, high spend policies. Tomorrow's taxpayers will pay the price and bear the burden. There's two kinds of taxes: current taxes and deferred taxes. And deficit and debt are deferred taxes. Secondly, a lack of transparency. Inadequate transparency about the nature and extent and the magnitude of the related risk. Clearly was the case for collateralized mortgage obligations. Credit default insurance, boy, that's a funny one. You must have put insurance in quotes, because when you looked at all the different conditions or whatever, there was not much insurance there at all. Same thing like the U.S. government says we have trust funds. Put those in quotes. They're trust the government funds. You'd go to jail if you were a private sector fiduciary and treated the Social Security Medicare trust funds the way the government treats those funds, but I'll stop at that right now. So not enough transparency about the nature and extent and magnitude of the risk. What about the federal government? Well, the problem's not today's deficits, although they're bad, horribly bad, post-World War II records. It's not today's debt, although it's 85% of GDP or approaching it. It's the off-balance sheet obligations. Tens of trillions of dollars of unfunded Medicare, Social Security obligations, commitments and contingencies in the trillions of dollars that will hit our shores like a tsunami, and that could swamp our ship of state, and we are not prepared. Third, debt, too much debt. Self-evident. Not enough focus on cash flow, ask Bear Stearns. And over-reliance on credit ratings. Some of these securitized mortgage arrangements went from AAA to junk pretty fast. Well, what about the federal government? Well, I'd say we are piling on the debt pretty fast. Cash flow, we're already negative cash flow for Medicare Part A. We're already negative cash flow for disability income for Social Security. We're going to be negative cash flow 7 years early for Social Security next week. The FDIC is about running out of money. It's got to accelerate, payments, tens of billions of dollars. The Highway Trust Fund is out of money. The Airport Trust Fund is going to be out of money within 3 years. These are cracks in the financial foundation. And what is Washington doing about it? Credit ratings? Let's just say we benefit from home team bias. S&P, I don't know where Moody's is on this. I know we've got somebody from Moody's here. S&P put a shot across the UK's bow about a week after I did an op-ed in the Financial Times at their request about does the United States deserve a AAA credit rating. A week later, and mine was a question, all right? I didn't give them the answer, but I'll be happy to give you insights if you want to ask in the Q&A session. But a week later, S&P downgraded the outlook, not the rating itself, but the outlook for the UK to be able to maintain a AAA credit rating. Well, I asked myself, well, gee, what do our ratios look like as compared to the UK? Deficits to GDP, debt to GDP, savings to GDP, off-balance sheet obligations to GDP, foreign debt to GDP, et cetera, et cetera. Answer, not so good. But when you have 64% of the world's global reserve currency, you have more rope, but not unlimited rope. And last, and relevant to this conference, not least, a failure, and let me underline the word failure, of both private sector and government risk management, regulatory, and oversight functions to work until there was a crisis at the doorstep. And that's how we get laggardship in Washington. Let me clarify. That's a word. I put it on Wikipedia. Please use it so it'll stay on. All right? Now, what's laggardship? Let me clarify what it means. First, let's start with leadership. Leadership is looking ahead, seeing the trends, seeing the opportunities, identifying the risk, taking affirmative steps to capitalize on the opportunities, to mitigate the risk in order to maximize value and mitigate risk. What's laggardship? Doing none of that, waiting till the proverbial stuff hits the fan, doing something in a crisis management fashion without adequate due diligence, without adequate consultation with the American people and other key stakeholders, and then passing something and calling it leadership. That's laggardship. I will leave it to you as to what we have in Washington. Yes, we needed to take action to deal with the unprecedented challenges in the financial services industry, housing, and the ripple effect thereof. No question. Yes, we needed to do something to stimulate the economy, but we wasted a tremendous amount of money because Washington doesn't follow Management 101 principles. You have to have an objective. You have to have clearly defined criteria as to how you allocate those funds or take actions, and you have to have appropriate conditions established up front before the money flows, or else you're going to be sadly disappointed. You can have GAO and every auditor you want, Joe Biden included. But if you don't have the right kinds of objectives, criteria, conditions, systems, and controls up front before the money flows, you're just going to find out what went wrong. In the case of the stimulus, only 1/3 of the bill met the definition of stimulus: timely, targeted, temporary. 1/3, according to the Congressional Budget Office. The rest, wants that people wanted, with varying degrees of merits, but they didn't want to have to pay for it. They just wanted to charge it to the credit card. You know, right now this country doesn't have a credit card limit that's constitutional. We need one. Other countries are moving to adopt them. We should. We really do have a credit card limit. We really just don't know what it is because the Chinese hadn't told us yet. And OPEC nations and others. We need to recognize a reality. We have 4 Ds from a federal financial standpoint: deficits, debt, dependency, and the ditch. I'm a Southerner. It's more like the Grand Canyon or an abyss. Let me clarify. Deficits, last 3 years: 2007, $162 billion. 2008, $459 billion. 2009, preliminary number, $1.6 trillion. 1,600 billion. 10 times 2 years ago. Debt doubled during George W. Bush. Almost doubled. So President 1 through President 42 accumulated as much debt as President 43 did in 8 years. And guess what? It could double again under Barack Obama if we don't start making tough choices. Debt as a percentage of GDP in 1789, 40%. But big footnote, that was not only all the federal debt, it was all the state debt. Because Hamilton did a deal to get ratification of the Constitution to assume all the state debts. So federal and state debt was 40% of GDP, and we got something for it. We got the Constitution ratified. We also won our independence. Fast forward, World War II. Debt to GDP, 122% at the end of the war. But we got something for it. We defeated the Axis powers. We saved the free world. We avoided attack on our continental United States. And we were the global economy after World War II. And the dollar was as good as gold. There was another big difference at the end of World War II. We owed it all to ourselves. Americans saved. Americans invested. Americans bought war bonds. We had no foreign debt of any appreciable amount. We were the world's largest creditor nation. And now we're the world's largest debtor nation. So that gets me to dependency. From virtually no foreign debt at the end of World War II, even though we had debt to GDP of 122%, we're now 85, we'll be 95 next year, and you ain't seen nothing yet if we don't start making decisions. We had foreign debt, foreign percentage of public held debt about 18% in 1990. It's over 50% today and headed up. Why? Because we don't save enough. Now, Americans have started to save more because they now know what a rainy day is. And they know that the too big to fail concept is false. And therefore, they've started to save more. They're being somewhat more prudent about their consumption. They're also being more prudent about taking on debt. That means that we're going to have more modest economic growth going forward if those trends continue. But, you know, the federal government's dis-saving a lot faster than they're saving, which obviously doesn't help. Health care, the latest debate. Yes, we need comprehensive health care reform. And in my personal opinion, there ought to be some level of coverage that is universal. For example, catastrophic. And I'm talking about the number one cause of personal bankruptcy today is catastrophic. It could be the cause of the country going bankrupt if we don't do something about health care. It's obviously a big legacy cost for many corporations, including GM and others, all right? Catastrophic health care costs. But let me clarify what I mean by that. I'm not talking about throwing procedures, technologies, drugs at a situation merely because you can, where there's no meaningful chance to improve or extend life. Even countries that have socialized medicine don't do that. Now, the physicians make those choices, and the reasons the physicians make those choices is because no other country on earth but ours, it's an industrialized nation and it wants to stay solvent, writes a blank check for health care. We do. We have a fee-for-service system that creates perverse incentives. We have 85% of health care costs paid for by somebody who didn't get the service. In many cases, the people who are providing the service have no idea what it's going to cost. That's not a system that's sustainable. In fact, if you look at the three things I said before, incentives, transparency, and accountability, we're 0 for 3 for health care. That's called a strikeout. So yes, we need some level of universal coverage eventually, much more modest than what's being talked about now in Washington. But we need to focus on first things first, cost. Cost could bankrupt this country. You cannot reduce cost by expanding coverage. That's an oxymoron. And in fact, the danger that we face today is we already have over $38 trillion in unfunded obligations for Medicare alone. And rather than figuring out how we're going to end up dealing with that, we want to make new promises. Let me give you an analogy based upon our housing challenge. Let's say that our healthcare system was a house. Let's call it the White House. It's built on a sinkhole of sand. It's got cracks in the foundation. The plumbing leaks. The roof needs to be repaired. It's mortgaged for more than it's worth. Figuratively, it's underwater. That's our healthcare system. Now, rather than making necessary improvements, restructuring, whatever you want to call it, rather than taking steps to make sure that we can meet the mortgage payment today and tomorrow, we're going to add on a new wing. It's got to either be the north or the south wing, because we already have an east and a west wing, right? So you got to add a new wing. And maybe we'll pay for it for 10 years. But who knows beyond? Remember Medicare Part D, prescription drugs. And it's going to be attached to this same structurally unsound and financially unsustainable structure. Personally, I don't call that progress. But let me come back to what I said before. We do need, over time, to provide some basic and essential level coverage, but we've got to dramatically change payment systems, dramatically retarget tax preferences and taxpayer subsidies, and I'm happy to answer questions on that. Way forward. Once we have turned the corner on the economy, once we have gotten past the immediate crises, once Congress and the administration try to get health care reform, and I think they're going to get a scaled-back, modest thing. I don't think cap and trade is going to happen. We need to do something, by the way, with regard to energy, but I don't think what's being talked about right now is the right way to go. Once that happens, it's critically that while 2009 was about the economy, turning the economy around, and short-term crisis management, that 2010 be about creating a better future and dealing with some of the structural and sustainability challenges that we've had for a while that are worse and are closer than ever to affecting us. We must avoid a super subprime crisis. And what is a super subprime crisis? A loss of confidence by foreign investors in the ability of the federal government to put its own financial house in order. A significant increase in interest rates, a dramatic decline in the value of the dollar, and what the result would be would not start with an R, it would start with a D. We can, we must, and I believe that we will avoid that. But we won't unless the business community, the professional community, and large segments of the population start telling Washington that we can't run our businesses this way, we can't run our families this way, you can't run our country this way. We are mortgaging the future of our children and grandchildren. We are reducing relative investments in their future with regard to basic research, critical infrastructure, et cetera, at a time when our global competition is increasing rather than decreasing. This country today is less educated on average today than it was last year. This country today is in worse health status today than it was last year. This country has lower average net worth today than it did last year, and lower average annual earnings today than it did last year. Those aren't positive trends. Yes, we are still the sole superpower on earth today, but that is temporary, and we must wake up and make tough choices. I think it's going to take something like a fiscal future commission like no commission you've ever seen before. And there is legislation proposing this. It's called the SAFE Commission, Save America's Future Economy. In the House, it's Jim Cooper, Democrat from Tennessee, Frank Wolf, Republican from Virginia. In the Senate, it's Joe Lieberman, an independent Democrat from Connecticut, George Voinovich, Republican from Ohio. These would create commissions. There's some differences, but essentially that would go outside the Beltway, state the facts, tell the truth to a representative sample of Americans, not just who decides to show up, a statistically valid sample of Americans. It would leverage the internet to engage the public in ways that they've never been engaged before with regard to public policy issues. It would be informed by that. Everything would be on the table: statutory budget controls, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, health care, and tax reform. And it would be able to make recommendations that, if a supermajority of the commission members voted yes, would be guaranteed hearings, guaranteed a vote, with limited ability to mend. It's got to be bottom line neutral. It's going to take different kind of citizen education engagement. It's going to take a process where everything is on the table that will provide cover for a tough vote, because we have a dysfunctional democracy. and we have a republic that is not representative of the public, in large part because gerrymandering of congressional districts, campaign finance laws, and we have something the founders never intended: career politicians who don't come from the real world, and nor do they go back to the real world. And there is an increasing disconnect. Now, there are some exceptions. There's still some good people there. I don't want to, but unfortunately, there are exceptions rather than the rule. And so we're going to have to reform Social Security. It's easy. I'm happy to answer questions on it. We're going to have to make some tough choices on health care and taxes. We're going to have to reimpose much tougher budget controls than we had in the 90s because we're in worse shape and we're closer to the tsunami hitting our shores. And at the Peterson Foundation, we are fighting for America's future. We're fighting to make sure that America's best days are ahead of it, because right now, that's not where we're headed. And I got married at 19. I've been married 38 years to the same woman. We have 2 children, 3 grandchildren, and to me, it's not just about patriotism, it's about my grandkids. Because this isn't their problem. They didn't create this problem, but it's their problem. And right now, they are set for a worse standard of living. And that is un-American. America is about leaving things better off in better position for the future. It's a financial, moral issue of significant proportions. So we are going to try to engage in a variety of efforts to define sensible solutions, to build grass tops and grassroots efforts, to be able to provide more transparency and accountability, to accelerate action in Washington on a number of large known and growing problems before we pass a tipping point, and to make the political price associated with doing nothing greater than the political price of doing something that might involve some shared sacrifice today for a better tomorrow. Last thing, remember what Einstein said. The most powerful force on earth is not nuclear energy. It's the power of compounding. When you're an investor, the power of compounding works for you. When you're a debtor, it works against you. The sooner we can make these changes, the less they have to be, the more transition time, the less disruptive, the less potential risk of passing a tipping point, and the brighter our future can be. And I hope that you're willing to help. Thank you. Pardon?
Well, as Shad just said, the sun just came out on that. What do you know about that? Maybe Providence is moving. Who has the first question for Dave Walker? And while I'm looking for the person with the question, you do have some humor in there, Dave, which I appreciate. And I'll give you one more. It's Marx's definition of politics, which you may have heard, and that is politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it everywhere, diagnosing it wrong, and applying unsuitable remedies. That's Marx's definition. Now, I will admit that was Groucho, but nevertheless, I think he was pretty much right. Don't you?
I want you to know I have something in common with Groucho Marx.
Which is?
We were both born on October 2nd, which is tomorrow.
Wow, wow. Well, good for you, good for you. And I would tell you that China was born on October the 1st, so here we are, right?
That's right.
Angelina, I'll get over to you in just a second. Here we go.
David, on health care, 60% of all health care costs the last 30 days of life. We approached a legitimate discussion a month ago that got characterized as death panels.
Yeah, right.
How do we have that discussion in a rational way that says we can take care of the old, but we can't spend it all at the end?
Right. Well, first, get the politicians out of the room. Okay? Get the demagogues out of the room. Okay? I mean, I think one of the and forget about whether they're Democrat, Republican, I could care. I'm a political independent, just so you know, so I don't have an axe to grind. But look, I mean, what we need to do is we need to state the facts, speak the truth, talk about the tough choices with the American people. And that's got to happen with people that are knowledgeable, that are respected, that don't have a hard D or R on their sleeve, because if they do, they're going to be discounted by a significant percentage of the population. You know, one of the things we also have to do, and this relates to the topic of this conference, There's three things it takes when you're looking at performance, whether it's a corporation, a country, an individual, compensation, whatever. Three things. How are you doing based upon your objectives? Are you getting better or worse? And how do you compare to your peer group? In the country, it means other industrialized nations. Well, frankly, we don't do too well. And most American people don't know it. What's frightening is our elected officials don't know it. All right? And so you've got to be able to state the facts and speak the truth. I will tell you this. I've been to 46 states in the last 4 years. I've got 4 left. Okay? And I'll go to 2 more this year, and I'll finish them next year. The American people are a lot smarter than people give them credit for. But they can't be pandered to. They need to know the truth. We need to make tough choices. We need tough love in Washington. And the politicians are ultimately going to have to vote, but they need to be engaged after the public has been told the truth, after a table has been set, because quite frankly, we got laggardship in Washington, not leadership.
Here's a question.
When Clinton left office, I believe the U.S. government was in a current surplus. Mm-hmm. It is now 2009. We are now in a huge deficit, which we'll talk about. But one of the 2 main factors was, or is, this ongoing Iraq and Afghanistan war. What would you suggest to the government to do? Because that's the black hole that's
Mm-hmm.
costing a lot of this deficit.
Mm-hmm.
What would you suggest to Obama
Sure.
to do?
Well, first, you refresh my memory that I didn't answer the fourth D, which is the ditch, and I'm going to come to your issue. The United States today has over $60 trillion in liabilities and unfunded promises, up from $20 trillion in 2000. $60 trillion. All right? Now, Iraq and Afghanistan has cost us a lot of money, and one can debate what we've gotten for it, but it's cost us a lot of money. But in the scheme of things, it's immaterial. And Iraq and Afghanistan are temporary. We're not going to be there forever, at least in the numbers that we're there, okay? And so therefore, yes, it is a contributing factor. But let me tell you what was a bigger contributing factor. Under Bush 41 and Clinton, we had statutory budget controls in place that prevented tax cuts that weren't financed, that prevented entitlement expansions, that constrained discretionary spending to a hard cap, that required that you looked at the cost of programs not just over 1 year but over 10. We need to look beyond that. They helped, provide controls to constrain spending and prevent deepening the hole through expanding government. But they also gave an ability for elected officials to say no, because they don't like to say no, all right? Those expired at the end of 2002. And at the end of 2002, when you go back and look at, we had another 2 rounds of tax cuts, we had expansion of Medicare, we had unfunded war costs, we had expansion of discretionary spending that was not all Homeland Security related, and that's because it was all charged to the credit card. So the expiration of those statutory budget controls was a key element. We need to bring back tougher controls, because those controls, for example, didn't require you to look beyond 10 years. They also didn't deal with mandatory spending and tax preferences. The biggest problem in the budget is not discretionary, it's mandatory. Believe it or not, less than 40% of the budget is discretionary. But here's the other thing that's interesting. Of that 40%, that's all the things the Constitution said the federal government's supposed to be doing. Everything that the Founding Fathers expressly said the federal government ought to be doing is in that 40%. That tells you how far we've come.
Right here.
First of all, thank you for coming with this message. It's timely to us. I was thinking about something Shad said earlier this morning about how shareholders don't feel like they're being represented by their board members. There's a lack of ownership, and perhaps an interesting parallel to our government. So I guess the question is this. We don't have a great track record with regard to politically making tough decisions, unless it's in response to a calamity. You touched on this a little bit. What are the options as you see them and as you hear them discussed in D.C. to provide some cover or creative frameworks to move this thing forward? Thank you.
Well, first, I believe that we face a range of extraordinary challenges, and it's going to take an extraordinary process to address those extraordinary challenges because Congress can't even get the easy stuff done through the regular order. Social Security, for example. Social Security is easy to do, and I'll be happy to answer a question. The process that it's been followed in the past had been fundamentally flawed, so they were doomed for failure before they even got started, and I'll come back to that. But I think the answer is a Fiscal Future Commission. And let me tell you why one hasn't happened yet. First, people are focused on turning the economy around, dealing with the immediate crises, and the administration and a number of leaders in Congress want to try to get climate change legislation and health care reform, and they don't want anything to get in the way of that. And the concern was that if you created a Fiscal Future Commission, some may say, well, let's see what the Commission has to say about this. Let's just punt the ball down the road. And so therefore, I think we're going to have to wait to see what ends up happening. But a number of things have happened that increase the likelihood that something like that will happen in 2010. Our foreign lenders are speaking publicly about their concern. The American people, and we do statistically valid research, the number 2 thing they're concerned about after the economy is escalating deficits and debt and increased reliance on foreign lenders, way ahead of expanding health care, way ahead of global warming, way ahead of Iraq and Afghanistan, way ahead of nuclear proliferation. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's reality, all right? You know, what happened, on the August recess got a lot of people's attention. Now, frankly, some of that was inappropriate, what happened, and some of the claim the death panels were outrageous, okay? That was outrageous, okay? But the fact is I think that is symbolic, not as much of health care reform, rather health care reform is symbolic of what's wrong. Washington tries to come up with its answers, then go out and sell it to the public. That's backwards, all right? And secondly, government is expanding when we already can't afford what we got. And so people are just kind of waking up and saying, whoa, wait a minute here. All right, so I think it's going to take an extraordinary process to address a range of extraordinary challenges. And my hope is if that can happen, and if the business community and others can get behind that, then we've got a chance to engage the American people the right way. We've got a chance to set the table. We've got a chance to force them to vote, to provide more accountability. That will help us get a down payment on the $60+ trillion that we have, hopefully avoid a tipping point, gain some credibility and confidence to be able to do some other things. But let me also say, we need political reforms too, and we probably need some constitutional amendments. We need some constitutional amendments on both our financial issues, and we need some constitutional amendments on political issues, such as redistricting, campaign finance, and maybe term limits.
Last question, sir.
First of all, I'd like to say this is a great presentation. I appreciate it. A lot of the things that you're talking about have definitely got to be addressed, but one thing that I definitely think about every 4 years when we go through the national elections is how do you get good, viable candidates? The thing that frustrates me most about our political system is it's not about having answers to the problems, it's about whether you are, it's not even, in our early democracy, it was federalism versus state rights.
Right.
Now it seems to be whether we're going to support Roe versus Wade or not, how we're going to get, whether we're going to be there to appoint the next Supreme Court justice so that we can supposedly swayed opinions that should be independent opinions, and whether we have same-sex marriages or not, and a lot of things we don't seem to separate church from state and so on. So how do we get beyond that?
Well, we have more than partisanship. We have ideological divides. That's what I actually get concerned about more, the ideological divide in this country. And I think that is fueled in large part by the way that we approach redistricting right now. Because right now, of the 435 House seats, there's only about 60 that are competitive. So what does that mean? You know that whether a Democrat or Republican is going to win. Now, what does that mean? That means that it's going to be decided in the primary. What does that mean? That means that the activists in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are going to decide the candidate. What does that mean? That means the Democrats are going to be, significantly to the left of the sensible center, and the Republicans are going to be significantly to the right of the sensible center, which means there's no way to do a deal. Which means it's not just a partisan issue, it is an ideological war, which gives you stalemate, which is what we have. And it gets you arguing about these fringe things rather than the things that threaten the future of the country, okay? And so I think there are a number of things we need to do dealing with redistricting, campaign finance, et cetera. And the other thing is frankly, we got to remember the first 3 words in the Constitution. We the people. If you look at governance, the executive branch is management. The Congress is the board. And we the people are the shareholders. None of us are doing a good job right now. That's got to change.
Before I ask you to give him a great round of applause, let me just say that tomorrow I didn't bring this bumper sticker today. I closed a lot of my speeches on this out of order broke issue with a great bumper sticker that I found in Santa Fe last year. And it goes to your question. And the bumper, just feature a bumper sticker that says at the top, bipartisanship. Do you know the definition of bipartisanship, by the way? I'll hug your elephant if you'll kiss my ass. Please give Dan Walker a great round.
I just want to mention one thing real quick. Thank you. I just want to mention one thing real quick. January 12th, 2010, Random House is going to publish Come Back America. It's a book that I've authored. All the proceeds are going to the foundation. I'm not making a dime on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.